My child. Stop scrolling for a moment, because what you are about to hear was never meant to pass you by unnoticed. There is something your heart has been trying to understand, something hidden beneath silence, delayed replies, strange pauses, and emotions you could feel but could not explain. You thought perhaps you were imagining it. You wondered whether you had misunderstood the energy between you and the person who carries such a powerful place in your heart. But tonight, a truth is being uncovered, and once you understand what happened behind the scenes, you will see their recent behavior differently. Your soulmate did something they never told you about. They created a quiet test, not because they wanted to trap you, embarrass you, or prove you wrong, but because a frightened part of their heart needed to know whether the person they were beginning to trust could really be as sincere as they seemed. Stay close to these words, because the test itself is only the beginning. What happened when they discovered the truth affected them far more deeply than they expected. They had prepared themselves for disappointment. They had rehearsed what they would tell themselves if you failed. They had even tried to convince their own heart that losing hope would be easier than becoming vulnerable again. But something completely different happened, and when your soulmate finally realized what your honesty revealed about you, their emotional walls began to collapse one by one. There is a reason they tested you, beloved. Somewhere in their past, trust became complicated. Someone once said beautiful things to them and behaved differently when nobody was watching. Someone made promises that sounded permanent and then treated those promises as temporary. Because of that, your soulmate learned a painful habit. Instead of asking directly for reassurance, they started observing. Instead of saying, "I am afraid you will hurt me," they watched the smallest details. Instead of admitting, "I care about you more than I want you to know," they looked for signs that would tell them whether opening their heart was safe. And you may never have noticed. That is what makes this revelation so powerful. The moment they tested you may have looked ordinary from your perspective. It may have been a simple conversation. A question asked casually. A detail mentioned and then mentioned again later. A situation in which you could have exaggerated something, hidden something, changed your story, or said what you thought would impress them. You did not know your response was being remembered. You did not know they were silently comparing your words with something they already knew. You did not know that behind their calm expression, their heart was asking one enormous question. Can I trust this person with the part of me I have protected for so long? There was no dramatic confrontation. No accusation. No obvious sign that something serious was happening. That was intentional. Your soulmate wanted your natural response. They wanted to know who you were when you believed there was nothing to gain from being truthful. Anyone can perform honesty when they know they are being watched. What they needed to discover was whether your truth remained the same when you believed nobody was checking. And that is exactly where something unexpected happened. You told the truth. Perhaps you did not tell it perfectly. Perhaps your words were simple. Perhaps you hesitated because you were trying to explain yourself clearly. Perhaps you even worried afterward that you had said too much or too little. But underneath your words was something your soulmate could not ignore. Consistency. Your answer matched something they had quietly learned. Your story did not twist itself depending on what would make you look better. You did not manipulate the moment. You did not create a more flattering version of yourself. You simply remained you. They were not prepared for how deeply that would affect them. For a few moments, your soulmate felt almost suspicious of the relief entering their heart. They checked again. They replayed the conversation in their mind. They remembered the exact tone of your voice. They remembered what you said before and what you said later. They looked for contradictions because some wounded part of them was convinced there had to be one. But there was nothing. That was the first crack in the wall. Then something even more emotional happened. They began remembering other moments with you. Small moments. Moments you probably forgot. Times you admitted something instead of pretending. Times you could have chosen an easier answer but chose a truthful one. Times you said, in your own way, this is what really happened, even when the truth did not make you look perfect. Moments when you respected someone who was not present. Moments when you did not take advantage of information you had been given. Moments when your actions quietly matched your words. One by one, those memories returned. And your soulmate began connecting them. Suddenly, the test was no longer about one answer. It became about your character. That realization frightened them because it meant something they had been trying not to admit might actually be true. Their feelings for you were becoming serious. There is a difference between being attracted to someone and trusting them with your emotional future. Attraction can survive on imagination. Trust cannot. Trust demands evidence. Trust looks at patterns. Trust asks whether the person standing before you will still be the same person when the excitement settles, when misunderstandings appear, when distance becomes difficult, when vulnerability becomes uncomfortable. Your soulmate had secretly feared that if they looked deeply enough, they would discover a reason to pull away from you. Instead, they discovered a reason to come closer. And beloved, this is where their tears began. Not immediately. At first, they smiled. It was a quiet smile, almost embarrassed, because they realized how much effort they had spent protecting themselves from someone who had not actually given them a reason to be afraid. Then the smile disappeared, because another realization entered their heart. You had been more genuine with them than they had been willing to believe. The weight of that truth became overwhelming. Their eyes filled. They tried to stop it. They looked away from whatever they were doing. Maybe they sat in silence. Maybe they held their phone without touching the screen. Maybe they replayed one of your conversations. Maybe they whispered your name so quietly that nobody else would have heard it. And then the tears came. But those tears were not only about you. They were about everything that happened before you. They were grieving all the times dishonesty taught them to doubt sincerity. They were grieving the relationships that trained them to question kindness. They were grieving the version of themselves that had learned to expect disappointment before allowing hope. And suddenly your honesty touched a place inside them they had not allowed anyone to reach. That is why the emotional reaction was so intense. They were not simply discovering that you had told the truth. They were discovering that perhaps they did not have to live permanently guarded. Think about that for a moment. Sometimes one honest person can become evidence that the entire world is not made of the people who hurt us. Your soulmate felt that. And it broke something open inside them. But there is more. Because after the tears came guilt. They began feeling guilty that they had tested you at all. They wondered whether it was unfair. They imagined how you might feel if you knew. Would you be offended? Would you pull away? Would you think they did not trust you? Would you understand that this strange little test did not come from cruelty but fear? They did not know. And now another secret began forming. They wanted to tell you. They almost did. There was a moment when they considered sending you a message. Their fingers hovered near the screen. They started typing something and erased it. Then they typed again. I need to tell you something. They stared at those words. Then deleted them. Why? Because confessing the test would require confessing the reason behind it. And the reason behind it would expose how much you truly mean to them. That is the part they have been hiding. Your soulmate has tried to make their feelings appear manageable, casual, controlled. They may have acted like they were simply watching where things go. They may have seemed emotionally distant at times. They may have given you mixed signals because one moment they wanted to run toward the connection and the next moment they became frightened by its intensity. But their secret test revealed something to them that they could no longer deny. They were not testing someone they felt nothing for. They were testing the person whose power over their heart had begun to scare them. They needed to know whether loving you would destroy their peace or deepen it. And your honesty gave them an answer they were not emotionally prepared to receive. It told them that perhaps the connection they had been trying to reduce into something ordinary was not ordinary at all. Beloved, there are moments in life when another person's simple truth becomes a mirror. Your soulmate looked into that mirror and saw how fear had been controlling them. They saw that they were asking you to pay emotionally for wounds you never created. They saw how often they had expected you to behave like people from their past. That realization hurt. Because once they saw it, they could not unsee it. They remembered occasions when you were sincere and they doubted you. Times you showed care and they questioned your motive. Times you became quiet because you were trying to respect their space, while they interpreted the silence as rejection. Times you tried to be patient, while they wondered whether patience was simply another strategy. And now they understood something. You were not playing the game they thought you were playing. In fact, there may never have been a game. That discovery made their tears return. They whispered something to themselves that heaven heard clearly. I think I judged them because of what someone else did to me. Those words carried more emotion than they expected. Because your soulmate is beginning to realize that you have been standing in front of them as yourself, while they have sometimes been looking at you through the shadow of someone who came before. And now they want to change that. Something inside them is shifting. Slowly. Quietly. But undeniably. They are beginning to look at you differently. Not as a possibility they need to protect themselves from, but as a person they might finally be able to build something honest with. And this is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Because your honesty did not simply pass their test. It inspired them to test themselves. They began asking their own heart difficult questions. Have I been honest with them? Have I admitted how much I care? Have I shown them the same sincerity I expect from them? Am I protecting my heart, or am I hiding from love? Those questions unsettled them. Because the answer was not simple. They knew they had not lied about everything. That is not what troubled them. What troubled them was what they had withheld emotionally. They realized there were feelings they had disguised, intentions they had minimized, hopes they had pretended not to have. And one particular truth rose above all the others. There is something about you they have been trying very hard not to say aloud. Something they realized before the secret honesty test ever happened. The test was not the beginning. It was the consequence. There had already been a moment when they understood that their feelings were becoming dangerously real. Perhaps it happened when you said something unexpectedly compassionate. Perhaps it happened when you remembered a detail nobody else remembered. Perhaps they saw something in your eyes, your patience, your loyalty, or the way you treated someone when there was no reward attached. Whatever the moment was, it changed them. They felt something awaken. And instead of celebrating it, they became afraid. That fear is what caused the test. But beloved, their plan had one flaw. They thought if you passed, they would simply feel reassured. They did not expect to feel exposed. They did not expect your honesty to force them into an emotional reckoning with themselves. They did not expect to sit in silence with tears falling because suddenly they could imagine something they had forbidden themselves from imagining. A future with you. Not fantasy. Not a perfect story without difficulties. Something deeper. A future where they could speak without wondering whether their truth would be weaponized. A future where love would not require constant investigation. A future where two imperfect people could be honest enough to keep choosing each other. That image entered their mind, and they could not push it away. For the first time in a long time, hope became stronger than caution. But hope has consequences. Once you allow yourself to believe something beautiful might be possible, you must decide whether you are brave enough to move toward it. Your soulmate is standing at that decision now. And you have already felt the shift, even if you could not name it. Maybe their energy has seemed different. Maybe they have watched you more carefully. Maybe they became unexpectedly gentle. Maybe they seemed like they wanted to say something and then changed the subject. Maybe they reached out and then pulled back. These are not meaningless fluctuations. Something is being processed beneath the surface. Your soulmate is trying to understand how to approach you after discovering that the person they were afraid to trust may actually be the person they have been asking life to send them. And there is another reason they cried. This one goes even deeper. Your honesty reminded them of a promise they once made to themselves. A long time ago, after a disappointment they rarely discuss, they decided that if they ever met someone whose actions matched their words, they would not take that person for granted. Over time, they forgot that promise. Life made them more cautious. Experiences made them skeptical. They started assuming that everyone eventually reveals a hidden side. Then you appeared. And without knowing the promise existed, you awakened it. When they remembered it, the emotion became almost unbearable. They realized they had been asking for honesty and then becoming frightened when honesty finally arrived in the form of a person. You. That is why the tears were not sadness. They were recognition. Recognition can be one of the most powerful emotions the human heart experiences. It is the feeling of seeing something your spirit somehow remembers before your mind understands it. Your soulmate felt that recognition. And now they cannot return completely to who they were before. The test changed them. But what happens next depends on a truth they are still afraid to reveal. Because, beloved, your soulmate did not only discover something about your honesty. During the process, they discovered something about another person around them. Someone had said something about you. Something that contributed to their doubt. At first, your soulmate believed this person might be protecting them. The warning sounded believable because it touched an old fear. It made them wonder whether they were overlooking something. That was another reason they decided to quietly observe you. But when your actions contradicted what they had been told, your soulmate became curious. They went back mentally. They reconsidered the conversation. They remembered exactly how the person had described you. Then they noticed something strange. The story did not fully make sense. One detail was wrong. Then another. And suddenly the secret test that had begun as a way of checking your honesty became something else entirely. Now your soulmate was questioning the honesty of the person who had planted doubt in the first place. That realization changed everything. Because your soulmate had trusted this person. Maybe for years. Maybe because of family ties. Maybe because of friendship. Maybe because they believed this person had no reason to interfere. But once the inconsistencies became visible, your soulmate could not ignore them. They started wondering why anyone would exaggerate something about you. Why would someone want them to doubt you? Why would anyone care so much about creating distance between you? The answer did not come immediately. But when it began forming in their mind, your soulmate felt another wave of emotion. This time, not tears of relief. Shock. Because a possibility emerged that they had never seriously considered. What if someone close to them had noticed the connection between you before your soulmate was ready to admit it? What if that person had seen the change in their behavior? What if they recognized that your soulmate was falling for you? And what if their warning had never truly been about protecting your soulmate at all? Your soulmate began replaying old conversations. Comments that once seemed harmless suddenly sounded different. Jokes about you. Questions about your intentions. Suggestions that your soulmate should be careful. Remarks about whether you were really as sincere as you appeared. At the time, those words seemed like ordinary concern. Now they looked more complicated. Because each time your soulmate began feeling hopeful about you, this person seemed to appear with another reason for doubt. Coincidence? Perhaps. But your soulmate was no longer certain. And that uncertainty created a new problem. If someone had intentionally tried to interfere, your soulmate needed to know why. They could not ask you without revealing the test. They could not confront the other person without evidence. So they did something unexpected. They remained silent. And they started watching. Not you this time. Them. That was when another detail surfaced. A detail connected to a conversation you may not even know happened. Your name came up when you were not present. Your soulmate heard something that made their chest tighten. Someone asked them a very direct question about you. At first, they tried to laugh it off. They gave a vague answer. They acted like it was not important. But the other person did not let it go. They asked again. Do you actually have feelings for them? Your soulmate froze. Because the question was too accurate. They could deny it verbally, but their reaction had already answered. The room became quiet. And the person watching them noticed. Your soulmate noticed that they noticed. Nothing was said for several seconds. Then came a sentence your soulmate has not been able to forget. A sentence that made them realize the secret test, the doubts, the warnings, and their own hidden feelings might all be connected in a way they had never imagined. They have replayed those words again and again since that moment. And before I reveal exactly what was said, understand this. Your soulmate's tears were not the ending of the story. They were the moment the real story began. Because after discovering your honesty, they made a decision. A decision involving you. A decision they have told almost nobody. They are preparing to correct something between you that should never have been distorted by fear. They want to confess what they did. They want to explain why they doubted. They want to tell you what your honesty meant to them. But before they can do that, they need to confront the one person who may have influenced everything. And beloved, the reason that person interfered is far more personal than your soulmate ever expected. Because when your soulmate finally asked them, "Why do you keep trying to make me doubt this connection?" the answer that came back was not a denial. It was a confession. And the first words of that confession were enough to make your soulmate realize that someone else had been hiding a secret about you all along.